going to be chairing this session today, and I'm joined today by Ercole Folona, and he is the lead author of this article, which you all know probably, The Key Role of Caregiver Confidence in the Caregiver's Contribution to Self-Care in Adults with Heart Failure, which was published in the European Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing in October 2015. So for you who are online, please feel free to ask questions. You can ask questions via audio, or you can type in comments. And we will try to cover as many questions as we can in the limited time we still have. And otherwise, you can, of course, mail them later to Ercole or me, and I can mediate in that. So first, to kick off, Ercole, a little bit, can you tell me a little bit about the study and the background of the study you have published recently?
Yes, actually my study in self-care of heart failure patients, can you hear me?
Yes, I
can.
Yes.
Started in 2009 when I went to the University of Rome Tor Vergata. And as soon as I started my job at the university, I started a project on heart failure patients. And in this quite big project, we enrolled 1,192 patients across Italy. We selected patients in 28 Italian provinces. And we also enrolled in this study more than 500 caregivers. And my interest in this field was because I worked for 10 years in cardiology, and I was very, I saw many patients that had frequent readmissions to the hospital, and so I was, I started to think what these patients lacked in order to prevent their hospitalization. And so I started to look more in depth the literature, and so I started this study.
Okay, good. So then you did the study and you published in the European Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing this paper on the key role or caregiver confidence in this caregiver contribution. And another question I have is, why did you decide to publish in the European Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing?
Yes, I confess that this journal was my first choice, and I was lucky. And, I thought about this journal because, it's an European journal. Italy is in Europe. And so I thought that probably the journal was interested in publishing this journal. And also, I have to say that, the European Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing, as you know, it's the journal number 9 in nursing science. So it's a highly regarded journal in nursing science, and very good impact factor. And so, these were the what I considered before submitting this paper to the European Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing.
And one more question about that, and then we will go to the article. But was it difficult? Did you get a lot of review comments for this article?
Oh yes, I remember that I had several comments from reviewers, but anyway, the reviewers were very helpful to improve the paper, and so their comments were very welcome.
Okay, good. So to go to your paper, Ercole, that you focused on the caregivers, so the contribution of the caregivers. What was the major reason for you to focus on the caregiver and not on the patient themselves?
Yes, actually, the first study that one of the first studies that we published was on patients. But when we designed the study, we immediately thought about caregivers, because in Italy, caregivers are very important, because generally heart failure patients, as also in other countries, are mostly elderly people. Sometimes they can have disabilities, they are not independent in activity of daily living, and so also in our culture the activity of caregivers is very important. And so when we started the project, we thought on how to measure caregiver contribution to self-care. And so we modified the self-care of heart failure index in caregiver version in order to capture this dimension, this contribution of caregivers in heart failure care.
Mm-hmm. Good. So the instrument on the caregiver contribution, that's published somewhere else or not? People can find that.
Yes. Yeah. We publish this is a secondary analysis because our first aim was to test the psychometric characteristic of caregiver contribution to self-care. And we published the characteristic of this tool in another journal, in the Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing. And after we did this secondary analysis in order to describe and also identify predictors, determinants of caregiver contribution to self-care.
Yeah. And then for the viewers, that the instrument that Ercole used is actually number 13 in the reference list. I just looked at it. Okay, so we have a little bit on the backgrounds, and I think like it was very clearly also in your introduction. So let's move to the method. And if people, I know several people are online, but if people have questions, please type them, and then I can see them. That's why I look away from the screen, and then I can post them to Ercole if you want. But I just had a question about your the methods where you talk about this primary caregiver. So you said participants in the study were the primary caregivers of heart failure patients. So what was your definition of a primary caregiver?
Yes, our definition of primary caregiver was the person that gave most of care to heart failure patients. And generally, the caregiver was a family member who helped patients in activity of daily living, in heart failure care, but sometimes also in a very small percentage could be also a friend of patients. But in this definition, we want to study the person in the family or outside the family that gave most of care to patient.
Okay. Yes.
But of course, this caregiver should not be paid, because in Italy there are many times, mainly in elderly people have to hire a paid caregiver. But we wanted to study we want to look only at informal and primary caregivers.
Yeah, because I think if you look at other publications, that is sometimes a little bit confusing also. Yes. That we talk about informal and formal caregivers and family, and
yes,
like now you have the primary caregiver. So that's clear for me. And then I have one more question about also the sample, because you have, when you talked about a primary study, you have more than 1,000 people. So how did you get to your sample size? Did you do like a power calculation, or how did you get to that?
Actually, we did not perform a power analysis, and yes, we have fewer caregivers than patients. because we enroll patients in clinics, and while they were attending the medical visit, and when we met the patients, we asked the patients who was the primary caregivers, and sometimes correspond to the person who took him or her to the clinics, but sometimes this was not a caregiver. And also there were also many patients that independently went to the follow-up, and this is why we have fewer caregivers than patients in the same poll.
Okay, yeah. That brings me actually to my next question about the what you described in the ethical consideration about informed consent.
Yes.
Because how was that done? Did both people, both partner and patient, have to give informed consent, or could it only be the partner or the patient? How was that done? Did you find any trouble or?
No, we asked to sign the informed consent form to both, so to patients and caregivers. And so actually, if patients were not willing to participate in the study, also caregivers were excluded. So we have all the patients for each caregivers, but we don't have all the caregivers for each for all the patients.
Yeah, yeah. So if a patient thought also like I don't want my partner to be involved, then the patient was still on the study, but like not in this article.
Not in the study. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and a little bit already thinking about maybe the discussion, but because we have to sometimes hear some studies about patient and partners, and then sometimes patients say, "Oh, I don't want my partner to be involved in this. You know, you should not or not bother my children or my husband." And then sometimes I get the feeling that the people who might probably might maybe need the care the most, or they have not a good relationship, etc. So they might be the people who need interventions the best. But since we want them both in the study, they will be excluded.
Yes, but in our case, I don't know if I get you, but in our case, we didn't find resistance to be enrolled, a lot of resistance to be enrolled in the study. But probably we didn't enroll many caregivers also because many patients were independent.
Yeah, yeah.
Because generally we don't have many problems in enrolling patients, because sometimes it was very interesting when in this case the patients who received the interview about, for example, self-care, when they read, do you exercise every day? And many patients raised their head and said, oh, so I should exercise every day. So probably this was an evidence that many of them probably didn't receive a lot of information about the management of their disease, how to behave with their heart failure, with their disease. So we found, many patients and caregivers were interested to participate in this study because it was a chance for them to receive more care.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, a person that gave them some times and they could discuss, they could talk with someone.
Yeah, I clear. I have a question actually from the Netherlands. Ellen Hagedorn mailed me. She emailed me because she could not get into the system. So if people want to email me, tini.jarsma@leu.se, it will also come to me. Anyway, Ellen asked me, so if I understand right, she asked me, is family caregivers could only be included in the study if they actually came to the clinic? This
Yes,
study. Yes.
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 This could be also a bias, of
Yeah.
course, of the
Yeah.
study, but we enroll the patients and caregivers only if they attended the clinics.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, for example, sometimes it's very difficult to enroll patients at their home. Yes, I know that this
Yeah.
could be a limit of
Yeah.
our study.
Okay. Good. Good. So we talked about the sample and the ethics. And then I have another question about the measures you talked about. And there, at a certain point, you ask caregiving hours on
Mhm.
patients. How many hours did you give care or something? Was it
Yes.
then defined to the uh, to the not to the patient, to the caregiver, what it was? For example, if they already do shopping for themselves, they buy groceries on the market for them, but also for their husband who is now having heart failure. Is that caregiving, or is that like normal spousal things you do?
Yes, we asked the caregivers to report. Yes, it was general, this question. We asked caregivers to report how many hours they gave care to the patient. And in this time, we included all activities that patients could do for their patients. So if shopping was related to, for example, buying food for the patients, actually this was caregiving.
Yeah, yeah.
But if they wanted to do shopping for, for enjoying doing shopping, this was not caregiving.
No. Yes,
Of
yes,
course.
yes. So they define themselves actually what they found caregiving as
Yes,
caregiving.
yes.
Yeah, yeah,
We said that for caregiving we meant all activities that caregivers did for the patients.
yeah. Clear, clear. Um, So, and one final question about the method, Ercole, is about, and that's just also for us to, as readers, to know, because several times you report the Chromebox alphas of your measurements instruments, which were quite good of the instruments. Is that something that you as an author do mostly or often? Do you do it always? What is your experience?
Oh, I must say that I have had a very good experience in analyzing the psychometric characteristic of these scales because in this study, two psychometricians worked in this study, and they taught me a lot actually because they have a different approach to analyze the psychometric characteristics of tools. For example, they made me to realize that sometimes in nursing literature there is a very common mistake that the items of instruments are selected based on Cronbach's alpha. Instead, their approach was to first to test the dimensionality of the instrument with, for example, exploratory factor analysis or confirmatory factor analysis, and then to use the best estimate for reliability. And what they taught me was that not always Cronbach's alpha is the best measure for reliability, because Cronbach's alpha Cronbach's alpha is influenced by the numbers of items and also by the item intercorrelation. And so in this study, they tested reliability with other measures, with other estimates, and actually, for example, the self-care of failure index in the past was a scale that had a very low Cronbach's alpha. But when they analyzed the dimensionality of the scale and saw that, for example, in the self-care maintenance scale, there were 4 dimensions, when we went and tested the reliability of each of these dimensions, actually the reliability was high. So what I learned from the collaboration with these two psychometricians was that we first have to look at validity, at the instrument dimensionality, and then we have to test the reliability of the instrument, choosing the best approach to test reliability, because not always Chromebox alpha is the best.
No. And in your experience, because you published a lot, do journals mostly ask for it, or could you also leave it out?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Now, because you published a lot now recently, also, do the most of the journals ask for to give things about Chromebox alpha and or test readers, or do they often don't want it? What's your experience in publishing?
My experience was that they generally ask to report about the Chromebox alpha. So I report, for example, in my study, we use the factor score determinacy coefficient. And so sometimes I also have to explain what is this estimate of reliability, because it's not very common in nursing literature.
No.
But generally they ask because they want to be sure that the instrument that we have used is reliable in measurement.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Yeah. So if there's no more,
I just want to give, last year in 2014, the journal Nursing Research published a special issue on instrument reliability. So I strongly suggest people who are attending this journal club to look at this special issue, because it's very illuminating. It's very interesting about the reliability of research tools.
Good. Thank you. Good suggestion. Yeah. Good. So I would like to go on, if there's no more questions about the methods, then about the results you found, and I would just go right away into the results on the caregiver contribution. Although one thing, just look at table 1, Ercole.
Yes.
There, I found, like, if you say like hours are caregiving per day, then it's like 7.5 hours.
Yes.
And I found that it's a lot. It's like a working day, almost. And like with standard deviation of 7, so there were people like taking care like 14 hours a day. So what's your reflection on that?
Yes, it's a big amount of hours our caregivers devoted to patients. But, in the past, I studied caregivers of Alzheimer's disease patients, and the hours of care were even more.
Yeah.
So I was not particularly surprised.
No.
When we performed the analysis, we also excluded the caregivers who take care of the patient for 24 hours a day. That was the 13.5% of the sample. And, excluding these caregivers, they gave care to the patients for 24 hours a day. The average hours of care was 5.39, so not so lower than the 7.5. Probably many patients were not very independent, and so, for example, they had a problem with sleep, and so I imagine that many of these caregivers gave to the patients, for some of these patients, a lot of care during the day and also the night.
Yeah. So going further on the caregiver contribution, and then you had in figure 1 you write, so just after table 1 you write, figure 1 illustrates the caregiver contribution to self-care maintenance, which had a total score of 55.9. So
Yes.
as a reader, I always just think, like, what is that? Is that a lot? Is that, like, what is the, yeah.
Yes, actually, we are in the middle because this scale gives a standardized score from 0 to 100. So we are a bit above the middle, the average. Actually, we don't know if this is a low score or a higher score. If we think to the self-care of failure index, and that is the patient's version of this scale, the author of this scale have said that a patient should have a score at least of 70. So if patients have a score of 70, we are sure that self-care is adequate in these patients. But we have not tested this score in order to see how higher should be the score of the CC-SCIFI in order to say, okay, the contribution of this caregivers to his patients or her patients is good. We probably, of course, we need to do further studies in order to see what is the best score in this scale in order to have better outcomes in patients and also probably also in caregivers.
How would you determine that such a cutoff, like 70 or 80?
We are not determining.
No, but how would you? How can you? What would you do in future?
Yes, I think yes, I think we have to do a longitudinal study. Actually, we are doing that, and to see if the outcomes, and I'm referring to hospitalizations or patient death, is predicted by a certain amount of the score in the CC-SCIFI, probably. Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or we could also relate this score to patients' quality of life. And we have to think about that because it could be very important to see if patients' contribution to self-care has an outcome on patients.
Yeah, interesting. And related to that is a question that I got from the Netherlands, from Ellen Hagedorn. She asked, I just have to translate from Dutch now to English. Do I understand right, she asked, that self-care of the patient is not measured in this study? So you only have the self-care contribution from the partners or from the caregivers, not from the patient?
No, in the whole study, in the bigger study, we measured self-care both in patients and caregivers. Actually, this was also very interesting because after these papers, we also performed dyadic analysis in order to see how self-care in patients and self-care in caregivers influence some of the outcomes. This was a cross-sectional study anyway. And but yes, we measure both. We measure self-care both in patients and in caregivers.
Yeah, but it's not reported in this paper.
No, it's not reported in this paper.
Yeah. So, just before I forget, Ercole, there was another question about the journal or the journal that had a special issue on reliability or on Chromax Alpha. Can you say the journal again? It was
Nursing Research. Nursing Research.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Eventually, the attendants can email me, and I can send them the papers.
Good, thanks. Okay, so then we talked a little bit about what it means, the self-care or the self-care maintenance course, etc. Then I would like to have your opinion on another issue on the self-care confidence, I think it is. Oh yeah, at a certain point, if you look at under table 2, you
Yeah.
write that more than half of the caregivers were unable to recognize the signs and symptoms of a heart failure exacerbation quickly or very quickly. So you say they could not do that. And can you help me to find where I can find that finding?
Yes, you can look at, in the text we synthesized, we try to dichotomize the results for the Likert score of each item. In the figure 2, we have reported the percentage of caregivers who the percentage of caregivers for each responses at the Likert scale. For example, the item 11 asked if the person you care for had trouble breathing or ankle swelling, how quickly did you recognize it as symptoms of heart failure? And so if you consider I did not recognize, or I recognize not quickly or somewhat quickly, we are above the 50% of caregivers. So this was our reasoning.
Yeah, I understand. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so
Excuse me,
yeah,
and the less than the 50% were able to recognize the symptoms quickly and very quickly.
yeah, yeah. So if you then stay in this figure 1 and figure 2, Ercole, there you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 shades of gray, not 50, but only 4. And here you have like the never or rarely, sometimes, frequently, always, a daily. And then in the text, you choose to dichotomize them to more than, and that is, I think, very acceptable for readers so they can make sense of the
Yes.
results. Did you, as an author, think about, maybe consider of also making the figure in two, like a lot, or so, to make them, to split them also in two, but because you choose now to give all 4 answering options, did you ever think about to synchronize the text and the figures?
Actually, in the first version of the manuscript, we did that. But the reviewers asked us to, to synthesize more and to give more a picture of the result, the scale results. And because the reviewers said, okay, but you readers have the figures, so they can look at the figures, so try to synthesize and be less specific.
Yeah, 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 and I think it is very wise, actually, as a
Yeah.
reader, to keep the figure still in 4, because then you can just really see where the details are. So
Yes.
I think it has been wise, because if you would also have dichotomized the figure, you would lose a lot of information if you do that. So I think it was a wise decision to, on one hand, give the text like most and a lot of not, and then give
Yeah.
in the figure give the concrete text. And yeah,
Yes.
good. Okay. Meanwhile, I have to check my questions because we have a good discussion. um, just see. Oh yeah, and then a little bit about the results about the variables related. So then I go back to the page 376, where you show, as shown in table 3, variables significantly correlated with a better caregiver contribution were, and then you say female gender, being married, better New York Heart Association functional class. So the people, if I understand right, the people with a better functional class, so who had less symptoms, they needed less. No, the caregivers contributed less to them. Can you explain to me
No,
how the NIA was?
yes, about NIA,
Yeah.
yes, higher NIA functional class was related to better self-care maintenance. This means that when the New York class was higher, caregivers contributed more to patient self-care. And you know, I saw this also in the literature, but it could be also something related to our culture, because you know, in our culture, caregivers try to do something when patients you know, start to have symptoms or are getting worse. So I think it makes sense. But also, these results, this correlation is supported by literature.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
when patients get worse, caregivers try to do more about self-care.
Yeah. Yes, I understand. Yes, yeah. Ercole, I see that the time is running really quickly, and we don't have, because of course I had problems getting in, so it's my fault. Sorry, readers. But I was just, if you have like 1 or 2 minutes to spare about the discussion, because I know, and I know we discussed before about interventions, that you would say from this paper, what kind of interventions would you recommend, or that we do our tests?
Yes, you know, if the readers analyze in depth the table 4, they can see that actually the most important determinants of caregivers' contribution to self-care was caregiver confidence. Caregiver confidence is caregiver self-efficacy. So when a caregiver is confident in contributing to patient self-care, means that they feel able to do something for their patients. And from the social cognitive theory by Bandura, we know that self-efficacy can be modified, and so intervention that have their focus on self-efficacy probably could be effective to improve caregiver contribution to self-care. And you know, also Bandura has theorized the source of self-efficacy, for example, performance accomplishment or vicarious experience. For example, we know that the more the caregivers get experience for their caregiving, the more they become confident. Also, Banduras say that vicarious experience could be very helpful for caregivers. This means that if caregivers who have a lower self-efficacy meet other caregivers who have a higher self-efficacy, they can be reinforced in their self-efficacy. Also, verbal persuasions could be another source of self-efficacy, and also emotional arousal. So I think that if we establish a good relationship with caregivers, if we do our best to involve them in caring for the patients, and we also compliment with caregivers for what they do, we can improve their self-efficacy. And from the literature, we know that when caregivers, but also patients, have their self-efficacy improved, they perform also better self-care.
Okay, thank you. Very good also ending and helping us to get these results into practice. So with that, I would like to thank you very much, Ercole Falona,
Thank you to all.
to join our journal club. And please, the people who are online or watch this later on YouTube, You can find the original article, The Key Role of Caregiver Confidence in the Caregiver's Contribution to Self-Care in Adults with Heart Failure by Dr. Ercole Falone and co-workers in the European Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing of October 2015. Thank you very much, Ercole, and see you soon.
Thank you. Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Bye.